Not all bareback pads are created equal, but what makes a good bareback pad? Which ones should we avoid? And which ones should we financially invest into adding into our program? In order to answer those questions, we're gonna have to take a good look at the anatomy of a bareback pad, and we're also gonna talk about realistic expectation when it comes to fit and function and some very important safety considerations all adaptive horseback riding instructors need to consider before using a bareback pad in their next lesson. My name is Saber Popoli, and I'm the owner and founder of Hoofalls and Footfalls. And through Hoofalls and Footfalls, I am on a mission to help educate, equip, and encourage fellow adaptive, or also called therapeutic, horseback riding instructors around the globe so that we can professionally and safely serve all ability level students that we serve through our lesson programs. So during my time in adaptive horseback riding, I have had lots of experience using bareback pads, and bareback pads are also a question that come up a lot from other instructors of what kind of bareback pad should I use? Is there a specific brand? What ones are good? What ones are bad? And something that I've learned over the years is that although there might be a couple brands that I like to use, something that we need to consider when we are looking at what pad we should use in our program, whether we're gonna go out and actually financially invest and purchase one, or if we should use a pad that was donated to our program, because just because something's given to us doesn't necessarily mean we should actually use it. We wanna first look at the anatomy of a bareback pad. We're gonna first take a look at this set here. So I've got this bareback pad on a dressage pad, but a little later in this video, we're gonna swap to a different bareback pad and a Western pad so that you can see what that setup looks like on this same horse and her build. So when we're talking about anatomy of a bareback pad, because you may not have heard that term applied to this inanimate object before, is we're talking about how this pad is structured and how it's gonna allow it to fit and function on our horses when we're actually riding and using that pad. So the very first thing that I'm gonna look at when I'm looking at the anatomy of a bareback pad is where the cinch or the girth strap is in relation to the front of the pad, and also where that line of tightness is gonna be when I actually go to tighten up the cinch or girth that is being used on that pad. This pad uses a cinch, so a single buckle. Some pads do actually have multiple billets, and you can use a girth on it, so it kind of depends on the pad. But no matter if it has a cinch or a girth setup, I'm still gonna look at where those straps are coming out of the pad. So with this pad set, the strap ends under here and we can't get a good visual of it going up, so we're just gonna kind of use our imagination here and draw this line up. I can kind of do so on the suede and see where it sits in relation to my horse's withers. So this line, if I draw it up, her withers kind of come down and they start dipping down about right here on this specific horse. So if I go to tighten up this cinch here, it's gonna create a line of pressure here, and so everything's gonna kind of be drawn back into that dip at the base of my horse's withers. So with this strap, the problem that we run into with a lot of pads is when that strap is on the very front of the pad, because then if it's up here and I tighten the pad and through use and movement, it's gonna slip and slide down to the base of your horse's withers, because that's just how physics works. And that pad is gonna then slip all the way back on my horse's back a whole lot faster and just in a position that is not gonna work well. This pad is still gonna slip because it just doesn't have the tree or the structure that's gonna hold it into place long term. But a well-placed girth or cinch strap can help kind of stall out that slippage and that movement while we're using the pad. So that's gonna be the first thing I look at when we're looking at the anatomy of a well-made bareback pad on if we should use it or if we should purchase it, okay? So if that strap is in the front, it's gonna be creating problems and I'm gonna be fighting it. If it's in a well-placed location, it's hopefully gonna hold my pad in place a little bit better. Another thing to consider too is that where is that the cinch strap at, and also how wide is that strap on the horse because that pressure is going to be distributed across that cinch strap. This pad I actually like quite a bit because the strap attaches here and it doesn't run over my horse's back. Yes, it is kind of concentrated here on the sides, which is not great, but I don't have this thin line that's pulling down onto one specific line across my horse's back. So that's something that I'm going to consider. The wider the strap is that girth or cinch attaches to, the more that pressure is going to be distributed across our horse's back. So just be aware of how that's going to be spread out on our horse when we do go to tighten this equipment. With pads like this, we also have to be very careful of how much we tighten because we might try to prevent some slippage by over tightening this tack and equipment, and that creates a whole world of different problems, not just the pad moving. So again, it goes to that realistic expectation of this type of equipment, how well it's made, how well made it is, and how much it's going to prevent the slippage, but also that I can't fight that this is lacking structure and it's not going to stay in place super well long term. That's just the nature of bareback pads. And you can already see here, this is kind of getting all out of sorts with her just standing here in my tie area. It is loose. This is not ride tight. However, this is still kind of simulating what happens over time as my tack and my equipment moves and we use it. So in addition to where the girth and the cinch strap are placed, we can also look at the material and build of the pad, and that includes like the thickness and the density of this pad. I like this pad because it's got a little squish, but it's also fairly dense, so it's going to help protect her back a little bit, not a ton, it's not going to stop all of it, but it's going to help protect her back a little bit from my rider's seat bones pushing into each side of her back. Because when we ride on a bareback pad, the pressure of that rider is primarily concentrated into their seat bones, which are sitting on my horse's back. Think about someone coming and sitting on your lap like a niece or a nephew or your kiddo, and they come and they sit and their little bony butt digs into your legs and it's uncomfortable, right? So same thing with our horses. When you're sitting down and it's just on those seat bones, your body weight, no matter if you're 30 pounds, 80 pounds, 120, whatever it is, your weight gets concentrated mostly onto those seat bones and onto your horse's back. This pad helps a little bit, but it doesn't completely solve that problem. When we're in a saddle, the tree of the saddle takes on the pressure of our seat bones and then redistributes that pressure across the whole tree area of the saddle on the horse's back. So it's less pressure per square inch on our horse's back. So think little seat bones versus big old tree of course, a well-fitting saddle. So just think about that concept too when you're thinking about a well-made pad. Yes, it's squishy, but there's still the fact that your rider's seat bones are going to be on your horse's back. And also, if that pad gets too thick, it can make it harder to get it to appropriately stay fitted on that horse and not move around a ton, because the more padding we get, the more roly-poly and slippy back it's going to get as well. With vaulting tack and equipment, it's made a little differently, and that is really expensive to invest into. Really good vaulting equipment is good quality, well made, but for most programs, you guys don't have access to it. We have access to bareback pads, so that's what we're going to be talking about and thinking about here in this video, okay? So, we talked about cinch placement, thickness of it. These come in different material as well. I like kind of that suede feeling. The other pad I'll show you in a second is like a fleece. Just think about how easy it is to clean. Is it machine washable? Is it gonna get hot? And also, does it provide a little bit of friction to help hold your rider in place and give them a little bit of stick to where they need to be sitting, or is it gonna be slippery, okay? So that's something to think about as well. The pads also, some of them do have a little contour here where they have a bit more of a raise here where it's going to go over your horse's withers. Just like different pads can kind of have that wither contour as well. That could potentially help that pad stay in place a bit more. But again, then pay attention to where that girth strap is at. And is it on the front of the contour? Is it more in the middle where it's actually going to help that pad stay in place under the rider? And then also, how thick is that strap that the pressure is going to be applied onto when you tighten to hold it onto your horse's back. The length of the bareback pad is going to vary. Some brands actually make smaller, like pony sized pads, which are really great for either your shorter backed horses or your actual ponies. Some of them only make just standard horse size, and so that can get a little challenging when you're putting it on your shorter backed horses like your Arabs or just smaller built pony sized horses, no matter what breed they are, or pony sized ponies that are out there. So be aware of the length of the pad and what's working well. Some of them are more of like a Western square cut and have pouches on there that you could stick a water bottle in, or I've seen people stick, toys in there for some of their classes. But still, don't let the shape of the pad fool you to not paying attention to other anatomy pieces and how it's actually going to function and stay on your horse's back. Some of the pads have grippy, like the non-slip underneath. I would highly recommend putting another pad underneath of your bareback pad, because one, that's going to help prolong the use of your pad and not get it all gross and icky and sweaty. And also, those rubber non-slip pads, I've known several horses that do not like those because it grabs hairs, and it also makes it really hot under there and they sweat, and it can be not that great for their skin and their hair, and they can become a little sensitive to that type of padding. So just be cautious when you're using non-slip type padding, and to protect your investment of the bareback pad, I'd recommend using some type of pad underneath that fits that horse well. And here in a second, we'll see what a Western pad would look like with this horse and a different type of bareback pad. So lots of things to consider. Different price points. This one is a Ride the Brand. This was given to me. I did not purchase it. I really like this pad. It's pretty comfortable. It's held up well. Would I go and purchase this? Depending on the price point, maybe. But it's made well, and so I am using it. All right, and here now we have our second bareback pad and a Western pad now on Miss Delilah. And so let's again apply that anatomy breakdown of a bareback pad to this new pad set. So we've got our, again, it's a cinch because it's a single buckle. So I've got my cinch here. This alignment, see how this one you can actually see how it goes all the way up and over. This pad actually has more padding in front of it. It also has a bit more lifted contour to allow for more wither space, but it is a little bit longer in the back. And if you take the pad off, it's actually shaped a little crooked, and there's a handle in the middle, which we'll talk about here in a second. This handle is not actually in the middle, and so this is structured well, but the overall shape of the pad is really not symmetrical, and it kind of drives me crazy. So that's something to be aware of too when you buy it, is how well is it made and is it actually symmetrical and even on both sides, because then it gets challenging to actually get your pad in the middle and even if it's just not made that way. So with this pad, notice how narrow this pressure, it's going to be distributed over the back of my horse. So not much room. So all that pressure is going to be primarily concentrated here versus a little bit wider area. Like I mentioned on the other pad, we did have that connection point here, but it didn't concentrate into a specific pad. Yes, there'll be a little bit here pressure wise, but it's still primarily pushing and pulling. I guess it'd be pulling on my horse's back here on this strap. So with this pad set and with the other one I have, they both just have this single strap here, and that's pretty common for bareback pads unless you do have like the English billets and your English buckles with rollers. And even though this cinch has a little roller on it, these pads can get really tricky to tighten without that pad turning and without pulling a ton on your horse and making it uncomfortable. So just be very aware when you go to tighten these bareback pads that you are paying attention to your horse's body language and being kind and considerate, and that you're also keeping your pad in place. Something I have seen some centers do, and actually what we did at a past center I worked at for several years, is we had one side replaced with a Western latigo, and then the other side we had a leather offside billet placed there so that it was easier to adjust than this nylon. The thing that you have to be careful of those though is if you do switch to a latigo, remember that then that creates a pulley system and that amplifies your pressure when you go to tighten. So that makes it even easier to over tighten this tack and equipment. So just be very careful with that if you don't go to swap it out. But I will say that a latigo setup, I like it a bit better because it is a little bit easier to tighten softly than this type of setup here. Just like a saddle though, we do want to have our girth or our cinch even as possible on both sides for the comfort of our horse and to also try to create as much balance and symmetry as possible. So with this pad, it is longer. It's still kind of more of that English shape, just like the first pad we were looking at. But this Western pad that it's on, this Western pad also has a bit of a wither contour, and the pad is a bit longer itself. And this pad, even though it looks nice and fluffy, this is actually not as thick or as dense as the first pad that we had on Delilah. So I'm gonna also keep into consideration that this pad, even though it looks fluffy and comfy and all of that, it's not gonna be as protective to her back as my other pad that has a little bit more density to protect her back from the seat bones. So don't let looks fool you. Make sure you go hands-on with this pad. The padding underneath, I would play around with a Western pad versus a dressage pad and see just what fits best and works best with your horse's specific build. Because depending on if they've got higher withers and it's gonna dip down and settle in those withers a bit more, or if they are kind of more mutton withered or just not much there to hold anything on and really just kind of smooth-sided barrel where stuff slides, you're gonna have to play around with the pad and the bareback pad that go underneath to see if you can find the best match that's gonna sit the best on that horse for the longest without having to over tighten that tack to try to keep it into place. But realistic expectation for bareback pads, they're something that just don't stay in place very well, like I mentioned before, due to there not being a tree underneath here and helping to structure it and hold it on that horse's back appropriately. Just have realistic expectations, and if you do use it, expect to adjust this tack and equipment right before you go to get on, and then you're gonna have to adjust it in between classes. If that horse maybe goes 2 classes in a row, you're probably gonna have to reset it because it's going to move. And depending on your rider's balance and ability, that pad might start shifting and you might have to dismount and reset completely because it just got all out of place. So, common safety considerations that we also need to consider when we're using bareback pads. One, like I mentioned, horses build. Some horses, their bodies just do not work well with bareback pads, and it's just an uphill battle, and they don't stay put, they turn, they twist, they slide, and it's just not a great match. And or they are uncomfortable to ride in bareback pads no matter how well that padding is trying to protect the rider and from that horse's withers or backbone area. It just could be uncomfortable. Also, some horses are not tolerant of that more condensed pressure of the seat bones on their back. So you also need to make sure that you're schooling your horse to make sure that they are okay taking a rider in a bareback pad. Don't assume that just because you can ride your horse in a saddle that they're going to be okay with a pad set or even true bareback without any type of pad on them. Those are three very different situations for our horses. Another thing to consider, like with this pad here, there's a handle on here. I have not cut it off yet, and I have not followed my own advice that I'm about to give you, but you should cut these little strappy handles off, because riders get on and they try to grab on and latch on, and then if they start to lose balance, they're gonna try to use this and it's just gonna slip and turn, and it's a dangerous situation. Like I mentioned too, this handle's not in the middle, and so this is usually off to the side, which can kind of give that rider a visual of the middle not being in the middle of the horse, and so they try to align with the handle, and it's just a whole downhill spiral from there. So I would highly recommend cutting the handles off, and I need to take my own advice and actually do that with this bareback pad. But that is something I teach right away with this bareback pad, is do not grab onto that handle. That's not for using it. If anything, we use it to put it on the horse and take it off, and that's about it. Also, some bareback pads have little slots here for stirrups. Do not use stirrups with bareback pads, period. End of discussion. I don't care if the rider is 20 pounds, a little tiny peanut. Bareback pads, due to their lack of a tree and due to their lack of structure, it is unsafe to use any type of stirrup on a bareback pad, because that little bit of uneven pressure into a stirrup is going to cause your tack and your equipment to turn and spin. Saddles don't do that because of the tree and how it sits and functions on that horse's back. So do not use stirrups at all on bareback pads, please. Huge safety issue. And again, no exception to the rule for tiny little kids, because still over time we cannot fight physics, and that is just what happens in a bareback pad with a rider of any type of weight. And you can try to get around that rule of physics and the laws involved there, but then that usually means that you're over tightening your equipment to try to prevent that slip and that turn from happening. So please don't do that, okay? Also, final reminder here before we end this chat about bareback pads and their anatomy and their realistic expectations and use in classes. Our bareback pads, when we look at all the other saddle types, equipment types that we can use or are commonly used in adaptive or therapeutic horseback riding lessons, so our Western saddles, dressage, English, Australian, trail, bareback pads are your least supportive equipment. So remember that these should most likely be used and should most often be used as a progression for our students, not necessarily the starting point, because starting a student in the least supportive tack and equipment could push them out of what we call their zone of proximal development, or that sweet spot of learning where they can do something with help, or we are pushing them outside of that zone into a zone of unsafety, and even with some help, they just can't quite do it yet. So see bareback pads as more of a progression for your students. They might need to start with a little bit more support up front. And remember that our students can progress into the pad. They might need support. And over my years of teaching, I've actually noticed that when I use my bareback pad as a progression, not as an introduction, that they actually progress and advance much more quickly, and I'm not having to undo bad habits and bad posture habits that come into play when riders learn how to ride on this. So just some things to think about when we're talking about bareback pads and equipment. So let me know, what is your favorite brand of bareback pad? Have you ever looked at the anatomy of a bareback pad before? Have you found a good combination of bareback pad and saddle pad underneath, whether it's a Western, an English, or a dressage? And what's your favorite match? And also, has there been a shape or build or type of horse that bareback pads just don't go well on? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below and your experiences down below in the comments. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share wherever you are watching or listening so you get notified the next time I release the next episode of a Hoof Falls and Footfalls video.